Right, have a look at this. Is this about EAL or about CLIL? Can you fill in the dots with EAL or CLIL? And this? EAL, CLIL? Content obligatory. Content, you hear that a lot, don't we, in EAL? Subject-specific language, CLIL, EAL. All these statements came from this. So you could say, they apply to EAL, don't they, as well? So, are EAL and CLIL the same then? Let's have a look at the principles and compare them, the principles underpinning the practice. Both pay attention to providing the learner with rich content. In the case of EAL, of course, this comes from the mainstream curriculum. For CLIL, it could be a curriculum subject, or it could be a topic linked to a curriculum area. For example, the study of geography of a particular region. It could be a PE lesson, or they could have a project on the rainforest, for example. Okay. Both EAL and CLIL put emphasis on output, ensuring language use in a classroom. Both link language learning with thinking skills. For CLIL, they use this 4 C's model to frame the practice, linking cognitive development, that is thinking skills, content learning, cultural dimensions, and communication, which they say is they're using language in and through and for. EAL also draws on a similar looking model. This one's developed by Thompson. And it's an 8-dimensional prism linking language development in first and second language, academic language development in first and second language, cognitive development in first and second language, with the learner being central, being affected by the social cultural processes that's going on all around them in the home, in the school, in the community, in the wider society. So you might say there's a degree of similarity between the 4 C's model and the PRISM model. Then, if we look at the requirements for teacher competency in CLIL and EAL, you could say they apply to EAL as well, don't they? Maybe apart from the first one, because we don't decide on the content so much, it's decided for us in the national curriculum. This is one for EAL. Maybe similar, yeah? Expressed differently, different emphasis. Even the planning framework, this one's offered by a CLIL teacher. Look, does it look familiar? This one, courtesy of Steve Cook, right? Steve published it as collaborative learning booklet, so planning framework. Yeah, very similar. So what about the theoretical models that they base their practice on? I think where you might see differences is the 2 points that I've asterisked there. So that although EAL pedagogy does take into account the role of the first language, bilingualism is not the same. Okay? EAL teachers are primarily concerned with supporting the English language development of the learners. They may have their learners using their first language, but this is with the aim of helping to achieve English language competence. Whereas I think for CLIL, bilingual competency is the aim. This is because the context and the constituents are different. CLIL is about developing an additional language in a context where the first language is strongly supported. So what you will typically find is that CLIL will be in a practice in an international school, or in a school where the learner's first language is the medium of instruction for a greater part of the curriculum. So this tells you that there's much more homogeneous constituency for CLIL, where learner backgrounds and language levels are similar, and often the learners share the same first language. Unlike the situation we have here in our schools, which is much more complex. The other asterisk in terms of content and language integration, the difference here is that for EAL, the content is dictated by the curriculum, the national curriculum. The starting point for language learning is the mainstream curriculum. For CLIL, there is a degree of flexibility in that in certain models, the CLIL teacher decides and selects the content and then plans for everything else around it. So they could find a topic that is perhaps more conducive to the particular language focus that they want to develop. But I think the biggest difference, I would say, is the context and the constituents. They're very different, and so EAL pedagogy has to cater for greater complexity. So we've looked at the theoretical models and the key principles, all of which are well developed and grounded in research for both EAL and CLIL. Potentially, there could be some blurring of boundaries for EAL. Since we draw on the same theoretical models, CLIL talks a lot. Well, we draw from the general like Brunner, Vygotsky. They talk about that. Genesee, but they talk a lot about Cummins. They talk a lot about Biggs and Cow. They talk a lot about using the Cummins matrix. The quadrant. What's the reality then? CLIL in this country, it's in its earlier stages of development. The theoretical framework is there, but practice is very much in the trying out stage. And it's very much focused on teaching foreign language, French, German, Spanish. Although there is an example of one secondary school who is using CLIL as a whole school approach for developing, for supporting all their learners, including EAL, because a large percentage of the school is EAL, and they found that the CLIL approach very effective. In future, there may be some synergy between EAL and CLIL. For EAL then, two recent research give an indication. The first one is a piece of research undertaken by a teacher from a teaching alliance, looking for some guidance of practice for the learner in her classroom. And her conclusions are, this is what she found. End of the first paragraph. Most of these strategies seem to be the same for early EAL learners and advanced EAL learners, which has proved interesting. Then the middle paragraph, these are more strategies rather than pedagogy, I would say. Then, of course, there's still a continuous debate about withdrawal and in-class support, whether to use the first language or not. The second piece of research is the research funded by the Bell Foundation. And this is their finding about the strategies used. Non-specific, non-EAL specific strategies, word bank translation, peer support, just not very EAL specific. It is disappointing, actually, that both research can only find low-level strategies being used, but do nothing for developing high-order skills and high-level competency in language, and very much focusing on maybe early-stage learners and nothing beyond. So, coming back to the learner in the classroom then, the different approaches could matter. But no matter what we call our teaching approach, whether it's EAL, CLIL, ESOL, EFL, what's important, what happens in the classroom is most important for the learner. For them, the support they need must address the dual objectives of learning in and through English as an additional language. In addition, the pedagogy must encompass strategies for dealing with the complexity of a classroom with learners from diverse backgrounds, with different prior learning experiences and different levels of competence in that first language. But there are probably points that I haven't covered, but I hope I have drawn out sufficiently the commonalities and the differences, though there is some blurring of boundaries, especially with CLIL. But as we have seen, EAL pedagogy is still not widely understood or practiced in schools. In such a context, and in contexts where schools are left by the government free to develop local solutions and local issues, it is paramount for teachers to build their practice on solid principles that address the distinctiveness of EAL. They must use these principles to frame their planning, their teaching, their monitoring and assessment. In conclusion, NALDIC has pushed hard over the years for the distinctiveness of EAL to be recognized. I hope I've shown how it is distinctive from EFL, ESOL, MFL or CLIL. There is some blurring of boundaries in school with potentially all the different professions coming in to work with EAL learners. Nevertheless, as a pedagogy, it remains distinct. And in contexts where schools no longer receive guidance on EAL and facing increasing numbers of EAL learners, it's all the more important or the more urgent for schools to develop their practice in EAL if the learners are to be better served. So, the advert for the learning support assistant for English as an alternative language called for passion. Well, what we need is zeal. We need to put zeal into EAL. We need some zeal to disseminate EAL pedagogy more widely and to distinguish EAL from all these other different forms of English language teaching, so that local solutions do not become free-for-all, anything goes. Thank you.